promotion. This landmark judgment mandates that basic wages must now include special allowances.
We anticipate a positive impact.
You know, sometimes the biggest risks to a company are hiding in plain sight. And right now, for a lot of businesses in India, that risk is a ticking time bomb buried right inside your payroll. The fuse? It's just a single line item on every single payslip. So today, we're going to defuse that bomb. We're diving deep into one of the trickiest payroll questions out there: what really counts as basic wages for Provident Fund contributions? This is huge, because right now there are kind of two different answers, and getting it wrong, well, that's a risk you just can't afford to take. For years and years, that special allowance was basically the payroll world's favorite magic trick. It was this really clever way to make PF contributions, shrink. But the magic show is over, and that very same line item could now be a massive liability just waiting to blow up. Let's get into exactly why. Okay, so for decades, the standard playbook was simple: keep the basic pay low and stack up the allowances. It was the absolute bedrock of payroll strategy for so many companies. Then, almost overnight, the Supreme Court came in and took a sledgehammer to that bedrock. The entire landscape of PCF compliance was just shattered. And what's so fascinating here is that the big 2019 Supreme Court ruling, it wasn't even a new law. It was really just this powerful echo from the past. It took a principle from way back, like 60 years ago, and applied it with some serious force to today's salary structures. And now, we're on the edge of another huge shift with the new labor codes, which are set to replace this old principle with a simple, cold, hard formula. So, what are the rules of the game right now today? Well, to figure out the current PF landscape, you have to get your head around one key idea: the universality test. This is the legal framework that every single company in India is being judged by as we speak. The best way to think about the universality test is like a duck test for your payroll. If it looks like a universal payment, swims like a universal payment, and quacks like a universal payment, well, then for PF purposes, it's part of the basic wage. It doesn't matter one bit what you call it on the payslip. And why is this so critical? Because it's backed by what I like to call the PF authorities' secret weapon, the camouflage doctrine. This gives them the power to see right through any clever names or complicated structures and get straight to the point. Is this allowance just a sneaky way to dodge PF payments? It's an incredibly powerful tool that puts the burden of proof squarely on you, the company, to be transparent. Okay, so let's put this universality test to work. Let's do a quick lightning round with some common allowances. A special allowance that gets paid out to everyone? Includable. A fixed convenience allowance that isn't a direct reimbursement for actual expenses? You bet, includable. What about HRA? That's actually excludable, but only because of a specific legal carve-out. Overtime. Also excludable, because it's not something that's guaranteed to everyone. You start to see the pattern, right? It all boils down to whether the payment is universal and unconditional. But hey, just when you think you finally mastered the universality test, the ground starts to shift under your feet. There's a new law on the horizon, and it's going to change absolutely everything. Welcome to the new era of the 50% rule. This is the tightrope that basically every company in India is walking right now. On one side, you've got the complicated, subjective world of the universality test. And on the other, you have the rigid, mathematical certainty of this new 50% rule. And stuck right there in the middle, a whole lot of risk. Now, this isn't just some small tweak to the rules. It's a fundamental change in the entire philosophy of PF compliance. We're moving away from a world of why to a world of how much. We're going from subjective legal arguments that need tons of evidence to objective arithmetic that just needs a calculator. And that shift has some really profound implications. So, the 50% rule is the new sheriff in town, and it's bringing a totally new kind of law and order to payroll. The rule is brutally simple. If all your excluded allowances, things like HRA and bonus, add up to more than half of your total pay, then that extra amount, the excess, gets clawed back and included for PF calculations. No arguments, no exceptions, just math. Let's just run the numbers real quick. Say total pay is $100,000. Your specified exclusions like HRA and bonus, they add up to $60,000, okay? So the threshold is 50%, which is $50,000. That means you're 10,000 rupees over the line, and that 10,000 goes straight back into the wage base for PF. It's really that simple and that unforgiving. So you're facing a dual threat, right? That means you need a dual compliance strategy. So let's talk about what you need to do right now to protect your business from the law of today and prepare for the law of tomorrow. For today's compliance, you've got to be on the offensive. You need to audit your salary structures, reclassify any of those high-risk allowances, justify every single exclusion with a crystal clear policy, and document everything. I mean everything. Your records, performance data, travel logs, that's your armor in a legal fight. But just playing defense isn't enough. You have to build for what's coming. And that means redesigning your compensation models, upgrading your payroll systems, and rewriting employment contracts to be completely transparent. This isn't just about a quick fix for compliance. It's about creating a payroll system that's actually built to last. So the game has completely changed. The old loopholes are closing, and they're closing fast. The question isn't, can we get away with it anymore? The real question is, are we prepared for what's next? Is your payroll defensible under today's rules? And maybe even more importantly, is it structured for tomorrow? Because tomorrow is already here.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're taking a deep breath and wading into some pretty complex territory compensation law. Specifically, we're tackling what we're calling the Great Indian Paycheck Paradox.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, and this isn't just about, complicated words on a payslip. We're really looking at this decades-long tug-of-war between companies and the regulators.
So sophisticated arms race almost.
Exactly. Over one fundamental question. What actually counts as basic wages when it comes to your retirement savings, your Provident Fund or PF?
And it's a huge deal because for years, maybe decades, the standard playbook in many companies was, let's be frank, quite simple.
Keep the basic pay figure low.
Keep it low, yeah. And then you bulk up the guaranteed pay using allowances. Give them fancy names. Special allowance was a popular one.
And the aim was purely to shrink the base number used for calculating those mandatory PF contributions.
Precisely. Which, of course, created this massive legal gray area, this statutory paradox, as you called it. And the reason we're diving into this now is because of a major legal correction.
The 2019 Supreme Court judgment, right? The Vivekananda Vidyamandir cases.
That's the one. It didn't just tweak things. It really sent shockwaves through payroll departments across India. It basically slammed the brakes on that old practice.
So the big question that this judgment forced everyone to confront is, well, pretty straightforward when you think about it. If your employer pays you a fixed amount of money, month after month, guaranteed, doesn't matter how you perform that month or, where you worked.
Just part of your regular pay package?
Yeah. Does sticking the label special on that part of your pay slip magically stop it from being, basic salary for your retirement fund?
It sounds simple, but the financial fallout is enormous. We've really gone through the weeds on this, the 2019 Supreme Court ruling itself, tracing it back to the foundational cases.
The bridge and roof from way back.
Right, 1963. Foundational stuff. And we've also looked at the compliance documents, the strategies companies are using now, and what's coming with the new labor codes. But here's the kicker, right at the start. The 2019 court didn't actually invent a brand new rule.
It just reinforced the old ones.
Powerfully reaffirmed principles that were already there, established nearly 60 years earlier. But because so many companies weren't following those principles, the judgment felt like a completely new disruptive force. It really was a shockwave. Okay, so let's unpack this. Where should we start? Maybe with the legal nuts and bolts.
Yeah, let's lay the groundwork. The Employees Provident Funds and Miscellaneous Provisions Act, 1952, the EPF Act. We need to get into the definitions, the specific sections that kind of open the door for this whole issue.
Right. The tension is baked right into the law itself. You have to look at two key sections side by side, Section 2B and Section 6.
Section 2B is the definition of basic wages.
Yes, and starts off incredibly broad. It says, basic wages includes all emoluments earned in accordance with the terms of the contract of employment and which are paid or payable in cash.
Okay, all emoluments sounds pretty comprehensive.
It does. That's the inclusive part. But then, immediately after that broad statement comes the list of things that are specifically carved out.
The exclusions, right? What's on that list?
Things like the cash value of food concessions.
Yeah.
any presents from the employer, commission, bonus, and crucially for our discussion, allowances like house rent allowance, HRA, overtime allowance.
And dearness allowance, DA. That's explicitly excluded in 2B.
Explicitly excluded in the definition, yes, which leads directly to that statutory paradox we mentioned.
Because everyone knows DA is included when your PF contribution is calculated. So how does that work if 2B says it's excluded?
That's the million rupee question, isn't it? And it's precisely why courts had to step in over the years. The answer lies in Section 6.
Okay, what does Section 6 do?
Section 6 is about the contribution itself. It mandates that the employer's contribution, typically 10% or 12%, must be calculated not just on basic wages, but on the sum of basic wages, dearness allowance, and retaining allowance, if any.
Ah, so 2B defines it out, and 6 puts it right back in for the calculation.
Exactly. DA is excluded from the definition of basic wages, but deliberately, explicitly added back into the base for calculating the contribution.
Why structure it like that? Why not just include DA in the definition in the first place? Seems a bit roundabout.
Well, there's some history there. DA, was originally meant as a buffer against inflation, protecting the real value of wages.
Right, cost of living adjustment.
Yeah. So keeping it definitionally separate in 2B gave some flexibility, perhaps in wage negotiations or agreements back in the day. But Section 6 makes it crystal clear, because DA is a regular, non-contingent payment meant to maintain purchasing power.
It absolutely has to be part of the base for your Social Security.
Precisely. And this whole DA and out thing highlighted a bigger problem for the courts. What about other fixed regular allowances that weren't DA but looked a lot like it? Were they genuinely excluded, or were they just basic pay or DA in disguise?
So they needed a principle, a test, to sort the genuine allowances from the camouflage.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which brings us finally to that landmark 1963 case. Bridge and Roof Co., India. LTD versus Union of India. This case gave us the guiding light.
The test of universality, what's the core logic there?
It's actually quite elegant. The Supreme Court said, look, the test is universality. If a payment is made universally, meaning to everyone or everyone in a particular category,
Okay.
and it's paid necessarily and ordinarily as part of their regular work, then it's part of basic wages for PF. The name doesn't matter. If it's fixed, guaranteed, and everyone gets it just for doing their job, it counts.
And the flip side, how does something get legitimately excluded under this test?
It has to fail that universality. It needs to be contingent in some way or not paid across the board. The court's wording was key.
Yeah.
It's excluded if it's something that may not be earned by all employees.
Okay, so not guaranteed for everyone.
Right. And the court gave some clear examples back then, which are still incredibly relevant today.
Let's walk through them. House rent allowance, HRA. Why is that okay to exclude?
Well, firstly, HRA is explicitly listed as an exclusion in Section 2B, so that helps.
Sure.
But applying the bridge and roof principle, HRA isn't universal. Even within one company, it's often only paid to employees who don't get company accommodation.
Ah, so if you live in the company quarters, you don't get HRA.
Exactly. It depends on the individual employee's circumstances. It's contingent on their housing choice, not automatically paid to everyone. So it fails the universality test.
Okay, that makes sense. What about overtime allowance? The opportunity to work overtime might be there for everyone, theoretically.
True, the opportunity might exist, but the payment itself is fundamentally contingent. You only get paid overtime allowance if you actually work those extra hours.
You have to avail the opportunity, as they say.
Precisely. It's not guaranteed pay just for showing up. It's directly linked to performing extra work beyond your normal duties. That contingency is what makes it excludable. The Supreme Court hammered this home again later in another case, Manipul Academy, saying payments only available to those who avail of the opportunity fall outside basic wages.
So, back in the 60s, the rules seemed pretty clear. Fixed and universal. It's basic pay. Contingent or variable. It's potentially excludable.
Crystal clear principles.
But somehow, by the time we get to the 2000s, these principles were, let's say, selectively interpreted or widely ignored.
That's putting it mildly. Companies definitely knew the rules, or should have, but the financial incentive to minimize the basic pay component was just too tempting. The potential savings on PF contributions were massive, and they decided the legal risk was worth taking.
Which sets the stage perfectly for the big showdown in 2019.
Exactly. Which brings us nicely into part 2, how the Supreme Court took those 60-year-old principles and applied them to the modern reality of payrolls filled with creatively named allowances.
Right, let's shift to 2019. This wasn't just one company appealing, was it? The Supreme Court bundled together cases from very different sectors.
That's right, and that shows just how widespread this practice had become. You had Vivekananda Vidyamandir, which was an unaided school, arguing its special allowance shouldn't count for PF. Then you had big industrial players, Surya Roshni, Uflex, Montage Enterprises, even St. Gobain Glass, manufacturing, services. It got across the board.
And they were all essentially making the same argument. Low basic pay plus these other fixed payments that they claimed were allowances.
Pretty much. The names varied, but the structure was similar.
What were some of those allowance names under the microscope?
Oh, it was a real variety pack. You saw special allowance a lot. Then there was conveyance allowance, but often paid as a fixed amount, not a reimbursement for actual travel.
Ah, okay. Key difference.
Huge difference. Also, fixed education allowance, fixed medical allowance, sometimes even things like canteen incentive or lunch incentive paid as a fixed sum, not linked to actual canteen use. And management allowance was another one.
But the common thread was
Fixed, guaranteed, paid every single month, regardless of performance or specific events.
Let's pick one example. How did the school, Vivekananda Vidyamandir, try to justify its special allowance? What was their argument?
They argued, well, it's called special, so it must be, for special circumstances or discretionary.
But the facts didn't back that up.
Not at all. The PF authorities had already established, and the Supreme Court agreed that this allowance was paid universally. Every single teaching and non-teaching staff member got it.
Regardless of performance or role.
Regardless. And crucially, the amount of this special allowance actually increased along with the employees' regular timescale increments.
So it behaved exactly like basic pay or DA.
Functionally identical. It was a guaranteed time-bound part of the salary structure. The court basically said, you can call it special all you want, but it walks like basic pay and talks like basic pay.
Then it's basic pay for PF purposes. Which leads us straight to this idea of the camouflage doctrine. Substance over form.
Absolutely central to the ruling. The court explicitly said it agreed with the finding that these allowances were essentially a part of the basic wage camouflaged as part of an allowance so as to avoid deduction and contribution.
They saw right through the label.
Completely. They recognized the deliberate attempt to structure pay to get around the law. The message was unambiguous. A fixed, universal payment is basic wage, period. Call it whatever you like on the payslip. The PF authorities and the courts have the right and duty to lift the veil, look at the real nature of the payment.
Okay, but here's something that might puzzle people, especially in HR or legal roles. If an allowance, even a fixed one, is clearly written into the employment contract, how can a court just wave it away as camouflage? Doesn't the contract matter?
That's a really important question. And the answer lies in the hierarchy of law. Yes, the contract outlines the agreement between the employer and employee on what will be paid.
Right.
But the EPF Act is a statutory mandate. It imposes a legal obligation on the employer regarding Social Security contributions. If a term in your private contract, like labeling part of the fixed pay and allowance, is designed to or has the effect of undermining that statutory obligation,
The statute wins.
the statute overrides the contract in that specific respect. You can't contract out of a mandatory law, especially when the structure looks like an attempt to evade that law. The court isn't rewriting the whole contract. It's just saying this specific part of the pay, despite its label, falls under the statutory definition of basic wages for PF.
Okay, that clarifies the legal standing. So if the default assumption now is that any fixed payment is basic wage unless proven otherwise, how does an employer actually prove otherwise? How do you legitimately structure an excludable allowance now?
This is where the court didn't just tear down the old structures, it also laid out the path for compliant ones. Essentially consolidated the principles from Bridge and Roof and Muir Mills into a clear three-pronged test. And crucially, the burden of proof is now squarely, unequivocally on the employer.
The employer has to provide the evidence. What are the three prongs of that test?
Okay, number one, the allowance must be variable in nature. And the court was specific, citing Muir Mills. It has to vary from individual to individual according to their efficiency and diligence.
So not just a fixed amount for everyone in the same job grade.
Absolutely not. If everyone at, say, manager level 2 gets the exact same fixed performance allowance every month, regardless of their actual performance that month, it fails this test. It's not truly variable based on individual effort.
Okay, that's prong 1, variability. What's number 2?
Number 2, it must be an incentive for extra output. There needs to be a direct nexus and linkage with the amount of extra output. It has to be payment for work done beyond the normal scope of the job.
Like a genuine production bonus tied to exceeding targets.
Exactly. Or a commission structure directly linked to sales achieved above a baseline. They can't just be a fixed payment that's called an incentive. You need to show the link to actual extra effort or results.
Makes sense. And the third prong?
Third.
Yeah.
It must be contingent on an opportunity. This goes back to the Manipal Academy idea and the core universality test. The payment is only available to those who actually avail of the opportunity.
Like the overtime example we discussed.
Perfect example. Or a night shift allowance only paid if you actually work the night shift. Or a field work allowance only paid for the days you're actually out in the field, ideally backed up by travel logs or reports. It depends on a specific circumstance or action occurring.
So variable or linked to extra output or contingent on an opportunity, that's the defense.
That's the defense. And the reason all those appellants in the 2019 cases lost wasn't because the court outlawed allowances altogether.
It was because they couldn't prove their allowances met any of these criteria.
Precisely. They claimed the allowances were special or variable or whatever, but they simply didn't bring the evidence. The court explicitly noted they produced no material or no data available on record to back it up.
They couldn't show the teacher's special allowance varied with diligence or the manager's management allowance was tied to specific extra tasks.
No proof. And in the face of the universality principle, a lack of proof means the payment gets treated as basic wage. That failure of evidence was catastrophic for them and set the stage for, well, the financial fallout.
Yeah, let's talk about that fallout. Part 3, the aftermath. Suddenly, years of payments previously excluded are now deemed basic wages. The financial hit for companies must have been immense.
Oh, immense is an understatement. It triggered a full-blown panic in many finance and HR departments. The impact was immediate and dual-pronged. First, the ongoing cost to company, the CTC, shot up.
Because the employer's 10% or 12% PF contribution now applied to a much bigger chunk of the salary.
Exactly. If basic plus DA was 40% of CTC before, and now suddenly all fixed allowances are included, making the PF base maybe 70% or 80% of CTC, the employer's monthly PF outflow increases significantly. That's the ongoing hit.
But the real fear, the thing that kept CFOs up at night, was the retrospective liability, wasn't it?
That was the big one. The judgment essentially validated the PF authority's power to conduct Section 7A inquiries. That's the formal process for determining dues and potentially go back years.
How far back could they typically go?
Often 5 years. Sometimes more, depending on the circumstances. So imagine calculating the shortfall in employer PF contributions for every employee, every month, for the last 5 years. That principal amount alone could be massive.
And it didn't stop with just paying the principal shortfall data. There were penalties, too.
Huge penalties. This is where it gets really painful. The EPF Act has two main weapons here. First, there's Section 7Q.
What does that impose?
Simple interest. But simple interest at a rate of 12% per year on the overdue principal amount, calculated from the date the contribution should have been paid until the date it's actually paid.
So for a non-compliant structure running for, say, 5 or 10 years, that 12% interest could easily double the original shortfall amount.
Absolutely. It adds up incredibly quickly. But that's not even the worst of it.
There's more.
Oh, yes. The real killer is Section 14B, damages.
How are damages calculated?
Section 14B gives the PF authority the power to levy damages for delayed payment. And these damages can be up to 100% of the arrears owed. The longer the delay, the higher the percentage, potentially hitting that full 100%.
So a company might owe, say, 1 crore in principal back contributions.
They could face another euro in damages under 14B, plus potentially hundreds of thousands or even lakhs in interest under 7Q. The Vivekananda Vidyamandira ruling made this nightmare scenario a very real, immediate possibility for thousands of companies.
Wow. Okay, so that's the massive hit for employers. What about the employees? You mentioned a trade-off. Lower take-home pay, but better retirement savings. How did companies navigate explaining that?
It was, frankly, a communications nightmare. You're essentially forced to restructure salaries. You have to go to your employees and say, look, good news, your long-term retirement fund is going to be much bigger because we're now contributing on a higher portion of your salary. But because your own mandatory PF contribution is also calculated on this higher base, your deduction will be larger, meaning your net salary, the money hitting your bank account each month, will be lower.
That's a tough sell.
Extremely tough. Companies had to really push the long-term security angle, the benefit of a significantly larger matched retirement corpus, to try and offset the immediate pain of a reduced monthly income. It required a very careful, transparent communication strategy.
Now, you highlighted one group that got hit particularly hard, international workers, or IWs. Why was the impact disproportionately severe for them compared to most domestic Indian employees?
This is a really critical point, especially for multinational companies operating in India. For the vast majority of Indian employees, there's a safety net of sorts.
The PF wage ceiling.
Exactly. The mandatory PF contribution, both employer and employee, is calculated only on wages up to a statutory ceiling, which is currently $15,000 per month.
So even if an Indian employee earns, say, $1 lakh a month, the compulsory PF is only calculated on that first $15,000.
Correct. Unless they voluntarily opt into contributing on their full salary, which some do, but the mandatory part is capped.
But that cap doesn't apply to international workers covered under the EPF scheme.
That's the crucial difference. For IWs, there is no $15,000 ceiling. Their PF contributions are calculated on their full PF wages, however high they might be.
Ah, I see where this is going.
So when the Vivekananda Vidhamanda ruling effectively redefined PF wages to include all those fixed allowances for an IW earning, say, 5 lakhs a month, where maybe 2 lakhs was previously labeled as allowances.
Suddenly, that entire euro 2 lakhs gets added to the PF contribution base.
Instantly. The PF contribution base might double or even triple overnight. The cost increase for the employer, and the deduction for the employee wasn't just on $15,000, it was on the entire expanded wage base. This completely blew up budgets for international assignments and global mobility programs for many companies.
That's a huge financial multiplier effect. Okay, so faced with this potential chaos, massive retrospective claims, soaring ongoing costs, IW budget nightmares, how did the regulator, the EPFO itself, react? Did they just let the field offices run wild?
Well, initially there was a period of pretty aggressive enforcement. We heard reports of field offices launching what felt like roving inquiries or fishing expeditions, basically demanding lots of documents, maybe hoping to find non-compliance somewhere.
Understandable panic on the company side then.
Definitely. But the EPFO head office stepped in relatively quickly to try and standardize the approach and, frankly, prevent overreach. They issued guidance, first in circulars around August 2019, and then more formally through Standard Operating Procedures, or SOPs, in February 2020.
What did these SOPs aim to achieve? What safeguards did they put in place?
They explicitly told field offices to stop the fishing and roving inquiries. They laid down clear rules for initiating a Section 7A inquiry.
What were the conditions?
An inquiry couldn't just be started on a whim. There had to be a clear, documented prima facie case suggesting that wage components had been deliberately split or camouflaged with the intention of avoiding PF liability.
So you needed some actual evidence up front.
Yes. And any documents requested during an inquiry had to have a direct, reasonable link to the specific issue being investigated. No more asking for everything under the sun just in case.
And wasn't there a new central unit involved? The CIIU?
That's right, the Central Analysis and Intelligence Unit, CIIU. This was a key control measure. The SOPs mandated that for certain types of inquiries, especially those potentially involving large liabilities or complex structures, the field offices had to get prior written approval from the CIIU before proceeding.
A central gatekeeper, essentially.
Exactly. It was designed to ensure consistency, prevent arbitrary actions, and focus enforcement resources on cases where there was genuine, substantial evidence of evasion, rather than just burdening compliant businesses with unnecessary investigations.
Okay, so that brings us up to the present, more or less. But the story doesn't end there. We're moving into part 4. The future. If the 2019 judgment was about correcting past wrongs based on judicial principles,
the future's about preventing those wrongs through legislative formula.
We're talking about the new labor codes, the Code on Social Security 2020, and the Code on Wages 2019.
Yes. These represent a fundamental shift in philosophy. We're moving away from relying on courts to interpret principles like universality and camouflage after the fact,
Towards something more predictable.
towards a quantitative formula-based system defined directly in the law. The aim is to cut through the ambiguity, make compliance clearer, and hopefully reduce litigation.
And the absolute core of this new system is something called the critical 50% rule. Can you break down exactly how that works for us?
Okay. The new definition of wages for Social Security still starts with the basics. Basic pay, dearness allowance, and retaining allowance are always included. That's straightforward. The codes also provide a specific list of things that are excluded. HRA, conveyance allowance, overtime, bonus, statutory bonus, commissions, etc. Again, fairly clear.
So far, so good. Where does the 50% come in?
Here's the game changer. It's in the proviso.
Yeah.
The law says, look at the total value of all those excluded components, the HRA, the conveyance, the bonus, everything on that specific exclusion list.
Okay.
Add them all up. Now, compare that total sum to 50% of the employee's total remuneration, their gross pay or CTC.
Right.
If the sum of those excluded components exceeds 50% of the total remuneration,
Then what happens?
then the excess amount, the amount by which the exclusions go over that 50% mark, is automatically deemed to be wages and gets added back into the calculation base for Social Security contributions like PF.
Wow. So the law is basically drawing a hard line. It's saying, we don't care what you call these allowances. If more than half your total pay package consists of things on the exclusion list, we're going to assume at least some of that is disguised basic pay.
That's exactly the logic. It forces a minimum level of guaranteed includable wages. It effectively mandates that at least 50% of an employee's total pay must consist of components like basic pay and DA that attract PF.
No more hiding 70% of the salary in special allowances.
Precisely. It removes the need for the PF officer to investigate the intent behind the allowance or prove universality through complex evidence gathering. It becomes a simple mathematical calculation.
Can we run through a quick example? Let's say an employee's total monthly pay package, their CTC, is $100,000.
Okay, good round number. Let's imagine two scenarios under the new 50% rule.
The employer structures the pay like this. Basic pay is $30,000. That's 30% of the total. And the remaining $70,000, 70% of the total, is put into various allowances listed as exclusions like HRA, fixed conveyance, maybe a generic special allowance.
Okay, so the excluded components total $70,000. The 50% threshold for a 100,000 CTC is $50,000.
Correct. Since the excluded allowances $70,000 or more than the 50% threshold, $50,000, we have an excess.
How much is the excess?
The excess is $70,000 minus $50,000, which equals $20,000.
And that you're $1,000.
That $20,000 gets automatically added back to the basic pay for PF calculation purposes. So the PF wage base isn't the $30,000 basic pay anymore. It becomes $30,000 basic plus $20,000 excess equal $50,000.
This PF is calculated on $50,000, much higher than the nominal basic pay.
Exactly. Now, scenario B, a compliant structure under the new rule. Same euro 100,000 CTC. But this time, the employer sets basic pay at $55,000, 55% of the total. The remaining $45,000, 45% of the total, goes into the excluded allowances.
Okay, so excluded components total $45,000. The 50% threshold is still $50,000.
Right. This time, the total excluded allowances, $45,000, are less than the 50% threshold, $50,000.
So no excess amount is added back.
Correct. There's no deemed wage component. The PF wage base is simply the basic pay, which is $55,000. Compliance is achieved easily through the structure itself. You just do the math.
That makes the difference very clear. It shifts the focus from arguing about the nature of payments to just doing the calculation.
Precisely. Let's quickly compare the two regimes side by side. The current system, based on the Vivekananda Vidyamandir judgment, relies on those qualitative principles: universality, variability, contingency.
Which means high litigation risk, dependent on evidence.
Very much so. It's subjective, requires investigation, and depends heavily on how well the employer documents everything. The future system, under the new codes, is based on that quantitative formula, the 50% cap.
More predictable, less room for argument about intent.
Yes, compliance becomes a matter of calculation. But the trade-off is that it forces significant salary restructuring for many companies. You can't just rely on clever naming anymore. You have to ensure at least half the pay is structured as includable wages.
Okay, so if these new codes with the 50% rule are passed and seem more predictable, why are we still talking so much about the Vivekananda Vidyamandir principles from 2019? Why haven't the codes just taken over?
That's the crux of the current situation. We're stuck in what you rightly called a legal interregnum, a period of dual compliance uncertainty.
Why the delay in implementing the codes? They were passed by Parliament quite a while ago.
They were, but implementing them nationwide requires two things. First, the central government needs to issue the final notifications setting the date they come into force. Second, and this is the main bottleneck, labor is a concurrent subject under the Constitution.
Meaning both the center and the states have roles to play.
Exactly. For the codes to work properly, all the individual state governments, all 30-odd of them, need to frame and finalize their own subordinate rules under the central codes. These state rules covered the detailed operational aspects.
And not all states have done that yet.
That's the holdup. Several key states, including major industrial ones like West Bengal, Delhi, Tamil Nadu, and others, have been delayed in finalizing and pre-publishing their draft rules. Until that process is complete across the board, the central government can't really notify the final go-live date for the codes.
So until that final notification happens, the law of the land for PF contributions remains.
The principles laid down by the Supreme Court in Vivekananda Vidyamandir. That 2019 judgment is still the active governing law that EPFO auditors use today when they scrutinize company payrolls.
Which puts employers in a really tricky spot, doesn't it?
It's a real tightrope walk. On one hand, they need to make sure their current pay structures are fully compliant with the Vivekananda Vidyamandir tests universality, variability, contingency to avoid those nasty retrospective penalties under 7Q and 14B right now.
While at the same time,
they need to be actively planning and modeling how they will restructure their entire compensation system to meet the future 50% mathematical rule so they're ready the moment the new codes are finally implemented. They can't afford to be caught unprepared for that switch either.
Managing two different legal realities simultaneously. Okay, let's bring this home. Part 5, practical strategy. What's the toolkit for you, the listener? If you're in HR, finance, or just want to understand your own situation better, what are the immediate concrete actions to take?
Number 1, absolutely non-negotiable. Conduct a thorough salary audit right now. Look at every single component of pay being paid out.
And apply the Vivekananda Vidyamandir test to each one.
Yes. Ask the tough questions. Is this allowance fixed? Is it paid universally to everyone in this grade or category? If the answer is yes to both, regardless of what it's called, special allowance, fixed conveyance, whatever you have, to flag it as high risk under the current law.
And what do you do with those high-risk fixed universal allowances today?
You have two choices, realistically. Option A. Can you genuinely restructure it to be variable or contingent, meeting one of those three tests? And can you document it rigorously? If yes, great.
But if not, if it's just a fixed top-up,
then option B is the only safe harbor under the current regime. You must eliminate that allowance as a separate component and absorb its value entirely into the basic wages.
Which means paying higher PF on it immediately.
Yes. It increases your current PF cost, but it completely removes the risk of huge retrospective penalties and interest for non-compliance when the auditor comes knocking. It's about choosing predictable current cost over potentially ruinous future liability.
This really hammers home the point about documentation again. The appellants lost in 2019 because they had no proof.
Evidence is absolutely king. If you do decide to keep an allowance separate, claiming it's variable or contingent, the paper trail is your only shield.
What kind of documentation are we talking about?
Your policies, your employment contracts must be crystal clear about what's fixed versus what's variable or contingent and why. If you have a performance bonus, you need the performance appraisal records, the KPIs, the calculations showing why different people got different amounts.
Right.
If it's a night shift allowance, you need the attendance systems, the shift rosters proving who worked when. If it's travel reimbursement, you need the actual bills, the travel logs proving the expenditure happened. Without that linkage, it just looks like fixed pay.
Can you give us a quick snapshot of what a clearly compliant structure might look like today? One that would likely pass muster under the current judicial tests.
Sure. Imagine a company that sets a reasonably robust basic pay, maybe already close to or above 50% of CTC, just to be safe and future-proof.
Okay.
Then maybe they pay statutory HRA, which is explicitly allowed. They might have a genuine quarterly performance bonus, but it's clearly linked to documented individual or team KPIs, and the payout amounts demonstrably vary based on achievement against those KPIs each quarter.
So documented variability.
Exactly. And perhaps they have a fieldwork allowance for their sales team, but it's paid only for the specific days an employee is verified as being out on the road doing client visits, supported by travel logs and maybe GPS tracking.
Contingent on the opportunity and verifiable.
Precisely. That kind of structure, focusing on verifiable contingency or variability for anything outside basic plus DA plus HRA, is defensible against a Section 7A inquiry under the current Vivekananda Vidyamandir rules.
So wrapping this all up, the big takeaway seems unavoidable, and it really impacts everyone with a salary slip in India.
It does.
The message from the courts, and soon from the legislature, is incredibly clear. Stop the label games. Substance over form.
Absolutely. The era of hiding basic pay behind fancy allowance names to shave off PF contributions is definitively over. If it's fixed, if it's guaranteed, if it's not genuinely contingent or variable based on specific performance or events, it's going to be treated as basic wages for PF.
Regardless of the name.
Regardless of the name, whether it's through the judicial principles we have now or the legislative formula coming soon, the direction of travel is unmistakable towards transparency and towards ensuring that a substantial portion of your total earnings actually goes into building your long-term Social Security. The battleground has shifted from clever legal arguments to meticulous, provable evidence.
Which leaves us with our final provocative thought for you, our listener, to chew on. We've talked about the trade-off. Lower immediate take-home pay versus higher long-term retirement savings.
Think about your own pay structure. Look at that split between basic pay and all the other allowances. Is that structure designed primarily to minimize your employer's immediate PF costs? Or is it genuinely set up to ensure that a significant, legally mandated portion of your total earnings is funding your financial security decades down the line? It's a crucial question about whose interests are really being prioritized in your paycheck. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.